We need some sound? All right. What a good turnout we have tonight. I cannot tell you how pleased I am and how few of us were virtuous enough to be caught up in the rapture. Welcome to the 2011 Nebula Awards, the one time of year when we all gather to honor the very best contemporary work of our peers. Thank you. Welcome especially to our guests and to our honorees and to all the nominees who are gathered to find out if they get to take one of these fine awards home with them. This is my first time as Toastmaster, so I did ask for advice. I went to my friend Tom Dirda, who has been a member of SIPWA from its inception. And I asked him what I should do, and he said, the very first Nebula banquet, we had Isaac Asimov for the Toastmaster, and it was very clear that he was simply ad-libbing it. He was making up as he went along, but he was hilarious. He had us in stitches. Thank you, Tom. But just to be safe, I also called up Connie Willis. I said, Connie, what should I do? And she said, Michael, keep it moving. So, by federal law, anybody who introduces Michael Dirda is required to mention that he has won a Pulitzer Prize, which is sort of the mainstream equivalent of a nebula. But really, that is, I think, the least interesting thing about Michael. He's a man of letters. He has published, this I have written down, 2 collections of his essays in literary journalism entitled Readings, Essays, and Literary Entertainments, and Bound to Please, as well as Book by Book, Notes on Reading and Life, Classics for Pleasure, a memoir titled An Open Book, Coming of Age in the Heartland, a forthcoming book on Conan Doyle, The Whole Art of Storytelling, and a book on caring for books. You may notice a pattern here. He has spent a great deal of his life reading and thinking about books and writing about books. When I first became aware of him, he was an editor at the Washington Post Book World, and he was in charge of science fiction, fantasy reviews, mystery reviews, rediscoveries, basically all the interesting stuff. Since then, he has retired as editor. He's devoted himself to his Washington Post column and writing for other respected publications. But to define him as a critic or as a reviewer is kind of like saying that Garrison Keillor is a storyteller or that Georgia O'Keeffe painted flowers. His prose has a clarity and a simplicity and a depth of thought that very few writers ever attain. So please join me in welcoming Silver Spring's own living cultural treasure, Michael Dirda.
Well, I can never live up to that. But I do want to thank Michael, and Peggy Ray Sapienza, and John Scalzi, and all the members of SIPWA for inviting me to be here to speak to you tonight briefly. It's an honor I never expected to come my way, but I'm extremely tickled by it. I can't tell you how much I am. But I also want to thank all of you writers, for the wonderful books that you've been writing in your lives, and people who've come to Nebula banquets in the past, who've given me such pleasure, and readers all around America and the world for so many years. And, I write about all sorts of books, occasionally about science fiction and fantasy. But when I meet people, I say that my closest friends and the people I most like in the world of literature are the science fiction writers and critics and editors. So thank you again for the chance to be here. My talk, which will not be long, but is rather retrospective. I mean, science fiction is typically the genre that looks forward, extrapolates, takes, if this goes on, what will happen. But I started thinking about the past, which is something I do a lot of at my age, but partly because of earlier this year with the death of Joanna Russ. Joanna Russ was the very first science fiction writer I ever met. I was a graduate student at Cornell, and one of my close friends was a woman named Mary Uhl, who was one of the dedicatees of The Female Man. She was a friend of Joanna's. Russ was then teaching at SUNY Binghamton and would come up to Ithaca occasionally for parties. And so we met, and we chatted and got on and we talked. And I was glad to know her. A couple of years later, I found myself, rather to my surprise, working at Bookworld as an editor. And I was responsible for a number of the features that Michael just mentioned. And one of them was a very occasional science fiction column, which was written by Algis Budrys. And one day, AJ called me up, and we were chatting, and he said, I've decided to take a regular gig with the Chicago Sun-Times, and so I can no longer write for the Post. And I took this as an opportunity to, first of all, I was sorry to have AJ go. He was a wonderful critic, an excellent critic. If any of you have ever read the various collections, Benchmarks was one. But I decided to go to my editors and say, look, we have regular column for mysteries, for children's books. We should have one every month for science fiction and fantasy. They said, fine, go for it. At which point I realized I had a problem. Although I had read Heinlein and Clark and Bradbury as a teenager, I hadn't really read any science fiction since I was about 16. I was 30 then. I was going to be a college professor. I was in Complet and all these high-minded things. And I said, God, I don't really know what's happening in science fiction. I don't even know a lot of the great figures of the past. So I wrote a letter to Joanna Russ, the only science fiction writer I knew, saying, Joanna, help me. Who should I read in science fiction? What are the important books that I should know about? We exchanged letters for several weeks. And I remember she recommended criticism that I read Damon Knight's In Search of Wonder, and James Blish's The Issue at Hand, and More Issues at Hand. But more importantly, a lot of the great books of the field, which were new to me. So in the course of about 6 months, I read The Stars My Destination, More Than Human, Lord of Light, Left Hand of Darkness, J.G. Ballard's short stories, half a dozen other books, if not as wonderful, nearly so. And I was just blown away. I remembered science fiction as what I'd liked as a kid, just as I liked comic books and all sorts of things, mysteries, what all. I read a lot of books. But here was a genre that was largely disdained by my colleagues at Bookworld and many people in the literary establishment and publishing that I dealt with. But these were wonderful books. They were not just as entertainment, but beautiful works of art. And I was appalled that they were not more widely and better appreciated. So I determined that one of the purposes behind the science fiction column and behind my own work later on would be to urge people to discover the work of science fiction writers as writers, not just people as part of a genre. That to break down some of these barriers, these fences that had existed, that people would say, I don't read fantasy, or I don't read mysteries or whatever. That there were, in fact, to remind them that there were great works of art, great books in all these fields. Well, I also asked Joanna for some lists of names for people who might write this column, and over the next 25 years, I called on a lot of the more famous figures in science fiction to write the review column, or occasionally to write essays for Book World. I read Theodore Sturgeon write. Robert Silverberg, Le Guin, people in this room. But I also, after a while, took to asking them to write about things other than science fiction. So these are, Tom Dish knows a lot about poetry. Let's have Tom Dish write about poetry instead of just about science fiction. And I think that it was a way of, again, breaking down these barriers. To go back to the early days of this column, in 1980 I went to my first Worldcon, my first convention, in Maurice Cantu in Boston. And there I glimpsed Alfred Bester, and I heard Harlan Ellison rant for 2 hours about Star Trek, the motionless picture. Robert Silverberg was the MC, looking extremely satanic in those days, as he often did. And it was a wonder, Timescape Books had just started. David Hartwell had a cocktail party on a ship in Boston Harbor. And I had a wonderful time. In fact, I remember my introduction to the con itself. I was coming from a different hotel through some long corridors, and suddenly there appeared in this sort of darkened corridor a tall, willowy woman dressed entirely in like black velvet and black hair, holding ruby red lips, and holding a pillow, a cushion, upon which reposed a gleaming white skull. She was sort of walking slowly through it. I said, whoa, this is cool. Anyway, I fell in love with the writers of science fiction, but also I realized then that, and as was true up until the 80s, that virtually all of the great figures of modern science fiction were still alive. Not all of them were that active, but they were around, they were alive. And what I noticed in the course of my encounters over the years in those early days of conventions was a wonderful quality that I found in science fiction fandom and among science fiction readers and writers. Most fields, you write books, you're popular or not popular, you die, your books are forgotten within a generation. But in science fiction, there seemed to be a sense of family and community that extended beyond the barrier of time. So that people, when they got involved in the field, they read the books of the Golden Age, just as they read books of, of New World, the New World's era, or the New Wave. There was a sense of contemporaneity, if I can say that word, which I can't quite, in that all these books were important. You needed to know about. Many of the books that Joanna had recommended I read, people all read. They had a common body of knowledge, a common culture, and it was important to be familiar with them as a way of becoming part of the field. And I really admired that because it was rare. You didn't find that very often in mainstream literary meetings, where people were much more narrow in their focuses. Well, I continue with the science fiction coverage. In my own writing, I again kept urging people to read beyond the bestseller list, to read beyond the books of the moment, to read books of different countries, of the past. This book, Classics for Pleasure, that Michael mentioned, mixes classics of genre literature and popular fiction, people like M.R. James and Sheridan Le Fanu and Agatha Christie and Dashiell Hammett and Phil Dick and Edward Gorey, with people like Sappho and John Webster and Erasmus and more conventional, canonical figures. My point in that book, as a point in my whole career, is that, such as it is, that these other books, all these books shape our imagination, shape the way we think about ourselves and about life and about art. And they're just as important. But in recent years, I've begun to worry a little about science fiction, and that's sort of the retrospective part. I'm not sure how much is true in this room now or here, but I sometimes am concerned that with the excitement and the exuberance of the new technology of the last generation, that the younger writers of today, and I'm not saying that there are any people here in that category, are not as aware of the past, of the traditions of science fiction, of the great books of science fiction, if you will, as they used to be. I've heard tell that there are people who love steampunk and who've never read H.G. Wells or Jules Verne, which seems, it's not impossible, but it seems, but why? Why not? And this is what troubles me right now at this point in science fiction, that there may be we may be losing, and I speak as a sympathizer who's always lingered on the outside, has been not wholly involved in the field, but has looked at it, that there's this sense of the traditions of the past that were so wonderful to me when I started may be in danger of being lost. And that if I come here with any purpose, it's to urge any of you to whom this may apply, or for the others here who have students or fans or friends or just readers that they know, that please go back and read these books by people like James Blish or Avram Davidson or Mervyn Peake or Hope Merleys, because I keep running into people who've never read them, who don't know anything about it. They're just names. People have started to read just a small handful of figures of their own time. All they know that the science fiction or the video games and the movies since 2003, but anything before then is kind of fuzzy. And I think that that would be a real loss. I do recognize that what's important for writers here, particularly at an award ceremony like this, is we want to honor the new. We want to, and we should. As Pound said, make it new. But Pound also said that the tradition was a beauty that we preserve, not a set of fetters that bind us. And that you go back to the books of the past in order to learn, in order to react against them, to go beyond them, to change them, writers tend to, you learn from other writers. And if you're a mystery writer, you don't want to necessarily learn from James Patterson. You want to learn from Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler or Joyce Simenal or John Buchan. You want to go back to the masters who gave us the templates, the blueprints for things. Anyway, that's sort of the gist of what I came here to say tonight. But mostly I wanted just to thank you again for the great honor of being part of this ceremony. As for years, I read about the Nebula Award banquets, and I've been to other cons, but never here before. And it is a great pleasure for me to be among so many wonderful people, wonderful writers. Thank you very much.
We have a surprise presentation for Michael. I have a few words of introduction for John Scalzi, but since he'll be making a later presentation, I thought I would not waste them.
First, thank you so much for your eloquent words. I thought they were truly a tremendous speech, so thank you very much for that. I think one of the things that you touched on specifically that really resonated with me was the idea that science fiction is not only a genre, but it is a community in some ways, also a family. And one of the things that you noted Mr. Dirda, was that you often felt that you were Mike. I can call you Mike. One of the things that I noted is that you mentioned that you often felt on the periphery of that. Well, I don't think that's fair. So what I would like to do is offer you an affiliate membership with SIFLA to become part of our community and family. Now, you do understand we will need references.
Just so long there's no dues.
And we will go ahead and make sure that you're all set up. We'll send you the orientation packet along with, as many of you who were at the business meeting know today, our secret decoder ring. So thank you very much.
This is the secret.
When I had my first story published in 1980, science fiction was like the village in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. It was a place that was so small and so new that death hadn't been able to find its way there, and consequently nobody died. And it's a slight exaggeration, but not a gross exaggeration. Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke were still writing when I came in. Locust did not have an obituary page. It was shocking for anybody to die. Times have changed, and it is, in a way, a sign of our success that we have so many people to remember. Stephen, would you do the presentation? As usual, let's work in rehearsal.
Hard drive died.
When John Berner died, Robert Silverberg began what I think is a really splendid tradition by saying, instead of a moment of silence, let's have a round of applause. done largely by volunteers because, quite frankly, if we had to pay people a decent wage, we couldn't afford to. And here to give out the SIPWA Service Award is Gay Haldeman, a woman who herself has worked long and hard behind the scenes to keep SIPWA running. So, come on up, Gay.
I'm really happy to present this award because I know how much hard work goes on behind the scenes. Our honoree is John E. Johnston III. He has worked very hard on the grievance committee, first as, let me get this right, first as the television movie grievance officer, and then since 2009 as the chair of the committee. My husband, Joe, was chair of the committee for several years, and I know how hard it is, and it's much more difficult now. He has just worked very hard for not only for us but for other things. He is the assistant director of the Louisiana Geological Survey, which put him in a position to do a lot of emergency work after hurricanes, including Katrina. And he's won the Louisiana Governor's Award for Outstanding Public Service. So we are doubly lucky to have him working for us. And so this SFWA service honoree is John E. Johnston III. Jim Fiskus is going to accept this for him. Is he here? There he is. It's very pretty.
It is indeed. I thank you for John.
The Solstice Award is given for those who have contributed greatly to science fiction. Presenting it today will be a woman who has contributed a great deal to science fiction. Shauna McCarthy has been a book editor, several magazine editors, anthology editor, and of course, agent. So please welcome her.
Hi, I'm really pleased to be here to give the Solstice Award because so many people in this room have given so many years of their lives to this field, and most without many thanks. But I'm delighted to be able to represent, today's winners. Allie Sheldon / James Tiptree was a dear friend of mine. She was someone that I just adored, who was one of the most influential people in my life. I just couldn't believe that people as romantic and beautiful and brilliant and talented as she actually lived outside of the movies. And one of the things that has always bothered me was the way that she and her husband Ting died. I hated that it left people thinking, oh God, how tawdry, how sick, how awful. I just wanted to read you an excerpt from a letter that she sent me in, 1982, which doesn't date me at all. We had been talking about marriage, and she said, "You're so right, meeting him and having him get me married to him. I had no such intention. It was the only time in my life I've ever been completely outfoxed. It was the luckiest thing that had ever happened to me, and the single reason I live today. I'm his third wife. He was a marrying kind of man, but he always tried multimillionairesses before. Very convenient, his children are amply provided for, but I'm his first try at a poor but honest working girl. He felt that he was living the wrong life. Turned out the only other serious contender was the Chinese ambassador's daughter. She went around with Jean-Georges Nathan. Funny thing, after we got married, we relaxed. It was a great relief not to try to dance with each other. Neither of us can. We were both working so hard, we sort of felt there was time to get to know one another better. When we retired, that time came, and these last few years have been quite indescribably lovely and funny. I think we both felt that what mattered was not the wild flailings toward love in our midlife years. We both had quite enough of that, but where we would be at 60, 70, namely together. And we are, and the whole thing is sort of unfolding like, can I say flower without you throwing up? A big solid one, maybe a broccoli. And the upshot is that every day I realize now I made no mistake 37 years ago. We almost did make a big one. We were married by a French mayor, and just at the last minute we caught the interpreter gold stamping my marriage to his father and Ting's to my mother. These Americans, so crabby over details. So I hope that if anyone had any lingering feelings about the manner of Ally Tipp's death, that this will put them to rest. It was a love match, and it was a great deal of love and passion. And she has done so much for the field. When I think of her, I'm so inspired because I was one of the first women working in science fiction, I mean, from the 30s up until the 70s anyway. And I felt like a party of one. And when Ally came along, I felt like a party of two. And it was inspiring to have her be the trailblazer and to know that she had been as influential in the field as she was. And some of the stories she's written still resonate with me to this day, and I'm sure they do with you too. So I'm really, really proud to announce that the first winner of the Solstice Award this year is James Tiffrey Jr. / Alice Sheldon. I assume I'm accepting this in her absence. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with it. But the second winner is someone who is very much with us today and who really needs no introduction. He's someone who has made a mark and many, many more marks, many of them in oils and tempera and acrylics, and who has pretty much defined the artistic vision of our field for, let's see, what year is this? I'm going to say, and I don't want to embarrass you, Michael, but 30 years? It's been a long time, and he has long since won and held the record for most Hugo's won for Best Artist. And at some point he bowed out gracefully and said, look, I can't do this anymore. But if he'd continued to keep his name in contention, he would have continued to win because he is a remarkable, remarkable artist. I mean, I was married to an artist for many years, and I thought he was a great artist, but Michael Whalen was able to... Oops, my bad. Michael Whalen depicted people in a much more relatable way, and I am really, really proud that he's been honored tonight, and that I don't know if he's actually here. Is he here? Oh, there you are. I haven't been around much. I just got here a few hours ago. But I think that Michael Whalen, having done, oh God, what is it, 14, 15 covers for Realms of Fantasy and interior art, and having been the force he has been in the field for many years, is long deserving and well overdue for an award such as the Solstice Award, and I'm really pleased to present it to him tonight. Thank you. Congratulations, Michael.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
Yes, I've received a lot of awards. I've been very fortunate to have been able to work in this field for as long as I have, and to received as much appreciation as I have from the fans, but I've got to say that this is the most meaningful of all the awards I've received. To have come full circle and to be acknowledged and given this appreciation by the very writers who inspired me to get into this field in the first place can mean, it can't be expressed in words, so thank you very much.
When SIFA was formed in 1965, the web did not exist, and the idea that there would be enough good science fiction, cinema, and television to put together a ballot was science fiction. Things have changed. To make the presentation, I have a photograph that I took of James Morrow at home, standing in a dog cemetery, contemplating mortality. There are not many people who could pull that off, but James can. James, would you come up here and make the presentation?
Help me, Ray Bradbury, to read these nominees so carefully. Oh, help me, Ray Bradbury. The Ray Bradbury Award for Outstanding Dramatic Presentation. The nominees are Despicable Me, directed by Pierre Coffin and Chris Reynaud. Screenplay by Ken Dario and Cinco Paul. Story by Sergio Pablos from Illumination Entertainment. Doctor Who, Vincent and the Doctor, written by Richard Curtis, directed by Johnny Campbell. How to Train Your Dragon, directed by Dean DeBois and Chris Sanders. Screenplay by William Davies, Dean DeBois, and Chris Sanders from DreamWorks Animation. Inception, directed by Christopher Nolan. Screenplay by Christopher Nolan from Warner Brothers. Scott Pilgrim versus the World, directed by Edgar Wright. Screenplay by Michael Bacall and Edgar Wright from Universal. Toy Story 3, directed by Lee Unkrich. Screenplay by Michael Arndt. Story by John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, and Lee Unkrich from Pixar Disney. And the winner. The winner of the Ray Bradbury Award for Outstanding Dramatic Presentation is Christopher Nolan for Inception. Accepting the award for Christopher Nolan will be Steven Silver.
Christopher Nolan couldn't be here tonight. He has a couple of movies he's working on. I'm willing to bet that a lot of people in the room will wind up going to see his Superman movie when it comes out, or his next Batman movie that's being filmed in Pittsburgh. But he's filming Superman in Chicago, so he just kind of switched it around. He did say a few words for me to say. Thank you for your recognition at this year's Nebula Awards. It is an honor to receive the Ray Bradbury Award. Audiences will always hunger for original stories and rich new worlds to explore. It's up to you all, the science fiction and fantasy writers of America, to keep this hunger satisfied by not being afraid to dream a little bigger. Thank you again.
The next award is the Andre Norton Award for Young Adult Science Fiction and Fantasy. I do have no joke about this whatever. We need new readers, and young readers really need good young adult books. So this is, I think, a particularly important award. To present it, a woman who, over her decades as the editor of the Science Fiction Book Club, probably introduced more people to science fiction than anybody else. Ellen Asher.
When Peggy Ray asked me if I would be willing to present this award, I said sure, but tell me if there's anything in particular I need to do. And she said, just be sure to pronounce the nominees' names correctly. That'll be real easy for you. So I looked at the list, and the first one was Paolo. Right. The nominees are Shipbreaker by Paolo Bacigalupi. White Cat by Holly Black. Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. Deerville, How Merca Got Her Sword by Barry Deutsch. Pearl North. I Shall Wear Midnight by Terry Pratchett. Conspiracy of Kings by Megan Whalen Turner. And Behemoth by Scott Westerfeld. And the winner is of the Andre Norton Award for Young Adult, I'm glad it's a long one, for Young Adult Science Fiction and Fantasy, is Terry Pratchett for I Shall Wear Midnight. Accepting the award will be Emily Wetton.
I'm not Terry Pratchett, sadly. He did send me a tiny little something so I can read to you. Regrettably, Terry cannot attend all of the events at which he might be receiving an award, particularly when they're on this side of the pond. But he has asked me to say, at last! Thank you very much.
And we now come to the main event. And even though I know Connie is urging me to hurry this up, I think since this is our last time to do it, the nominees have all been making jokes all day about whether or not it's an honor just to be nominated. But no matter what you think of that, it is one hell of an accomplishment to get onto the ballot. And I think it would be great if we gave everybody a round of applause. The short story is not only the most concise form of fiction there is, it is the hardest there is to write brilliantly, which also makes it the least economically viable form. Here to present the Nebula Award for Best Short Story, a man who exploits all this idealism. Our own beloved Gordon Van Gelder.
Just wait till you see the check for your next story, Michael.
That's my last one.
Wait, you got a check for the last one? In all seriousness, I have to say, before I present the awards, that I have really strong memories from my youth of reading the first couple of Nebula anthologies that Damon assembled, with Ballard's The Drowned Giant in there, and Richard McKenna, and Delazny and Zeleny. And it is, I really consider it every year a great honor and privilege to be able to participate in the annual awards. And I encourage everyone here and everyone in SIFWA to continue doing so. The award is only as good as we make it. And those writers and stories, those stories that made this year's ballot are Arvies by Adam Troy Castro, published in Lightspeed magazine. How Interesting, A Tiny Man by Harlan Ellison, published in Realms of Fantasy. Ponies by Kish Johnson, published on Tor.com. I'm Alive, I Love You, I'll See You in Reno by Vylar Kaftan, published in Lightspeed magazine. The Green Book by Amal El Motar, published in Apex magazine. Ghosts of New York by Jennifer Pelland, published in Dark Faith. And Conditional Love by Felicity Shoulders, published in Asimov's Science Fiction magazine. And the award goes to Kish Johnson for Ponies.
Thank you. It's a tremendous ballot, and I was honored to be part of it. I would like to call out my friend Barbara Webb, who was the inspiration for this story, and Jim Gunn, who I wrote the story for. And I would like this story to be an anachronism, and I'd like there not to be bullying. And I hope that day comes, so thank you so much.
Oh, wait, there's more. The award for Best Story also goes to Harlan Ellison for How Interesting. Accepting will be Jack McDevitt and Shauna McCarthy.
That's all mine? Okay. I'm shocked as whatever. I'm really, really happy to be here to accept the award for Harlan. Harlan is an amazing human being. That's the only adjective I can use. And he has worked long and hard to keep this field in the forefront of people's minds. And he has certainly accomplished that. And he's just a terrific, amazing writer. And God, when I was 13, I had such a crush on him. So Jack is here to say some words, and I'm delighted. I'm so glad to have bought this magazine.
Harlan, I know, would have given almost anything to be here this evening. In any case, he would certainly want me to say thank you, and to tell you that he remains delighted to walk among us.
The novelette is easily the most competitive form of short fiction when it comes to the awards. There are more really brilliant novelettes than there are works of short fiction in any other category, which makes writing them an act of optimism. So, to present the award, a man who is really a master of the form and the most optimistic man I know, John Kessel.
What was that about? I'm honored and privileged to present the Nebula Award for Novelette. In a minute, one of these stories will join the list of illustrious winners of the award. Stories like Blood Child by Octavia Butler, Tower of Babylon by Ted Chiang, The Screwfly Solution by Alice Sheldon. The other 6 nominees will join the list of ignominious losers of stories like The Lucky Strike by Kim Stanley Robinson, Think Like a Dinosaur by James Patrick Kelly, The Matter of Segre by Ursula K. Le Guin. The nominees this year for novelette are Map of 17 by Christopher Barzak, The Jaguar House in Shadow by Aliette de Bodard, The Fortuitous Meeting of Gerard Van Oost and Uludara by Christopher Kastenschmidt, Plus or Minus by James Patrick Kelly from by Shweta Narayan from The Beastly Bride, Leviathan, Whom Thou Hast Made by Eric James Stone from and Stonewall Truth by Caroline M. Yaquin from Asimov Science Fiction. And the winner for Best Novelette said optimistically, is Eric James Stone.
With all the great writers that were nominated along with me, I really didn't think this was going to happen. I want to thank Stan Schmidt for having the excellent taste to keep buying stories from me, and I hope that's a trend that continues for a long time. By the way, Stan, no pressure about the submission I sent you recently. I want to thank Christine Catherine Rush, Dean Wesley Smith, and Sheila Williams, who taught the workshop at which I started writing the story. And the assignment was to write a story with the main character based on myself, set in the middle of the sun, in which the problem was, can't get a date. Writing that story turned out to be surprisingly difficult because even though I had long-time personal experience with 2 out of those 3, now for those of you who are thinking, wow, Eric has personal experience with the middle of the sun, because it's hard to believe that he would have trouble getting a date. I thank you for your charity. I need to thank Alethea Contis, Mary Robinette Coal, Sean Markey, and Beth Wodzinski, who insisted that I needed to finish the story after the workshop. And a big thank you to all those who critiqued it, including especially my writing groups, The Rats with Swords and By the Book. And I'd like to thank all the writing instructors I've had, especially Caleb Warnock, Orson Scott Card, and Jean Cavellos. And I guess I'd better quit before this turns into a filibuster. But I'd like to close by thanking God for all the blessings He's given me in my life, in particular my family, who have just been tremendously supportive of my writing. Thank you.
The novella, it has been said, is the perfect form for science fiction, long enough to contain a world and short enough to be read in an afternoon. It is also the one form that shows the most integrity, since the author resisted the urge to pad it out and sell it as a novel. I was in the Syphilis Week at the WorldCon, some damn WorldCon rather, and I ran across Robert Silverberg. I noticed he wasn't wearing a name tag. And I said, Bob, you're not wearing a name tag. He looked at me and said, it will be a sorry day when Robert Silverberg needs a name tag in the Syphilis Week. In which spirit, let me present the presenter, John Scalzi.
Apropos to that, the first time I was at a WorldCon party, I was standing next to this urbane older man, and we had a fantastic conversation and just a great introduction to the science fiction world, and then he left, and I turned to the person next to me, and I said, who have I been talking to for the last half hour? And they looked at me like I was an idiot and said, it was Robert Silverberg, you idiot. He didn't have a name tag on. To my defense, I know him now. We're going to go right ahead and skip all the introductions and go right to the nominees for the Nebula Award this year. Our nominees are The Alchemist by Paolo Bacigalupi, Iron Shoes by J. Kathleen Chaney, The Life Cycle of Software Objects by Ted Chiang, The Sultan of the Clouds by Jeffrey A. Landis, Ghosts Doing the Orange Dance by Paul Park, and The Lady Who Plucked Red Flowers Beneath the Queen's Window by Rachel Swirsky. By the power invested in me as the president of SIFLA, next year, don't lick it all the way across. Good Lord. I know I'm mechanically inadept, but this is ridiculous. The award this year goes to Rachel Swirsky.
I'd say I'm shocked, and that's an understatement. You know, when I saw Ted Chiang in a couple months ago, I told him I would be delighted to lose to him, which I would have been. It's a wonderful novella, as were all the other nominees. I'd like to thank my husband and my parents and everyone who's had the patience to read my stories or help me with writing. You know, last night at the... I'm very shocked. Last night at the reception, I was talking to Michael Swanwick and Gordon Van-Gelder and Daryl Schweitzer, and they told me that there are uses for the awards, that the Hugo makes a great paper towel holder, and apparently if you put a sock over the World Fantasy Award, you get a portrait of Jacques Cousteau. So I asked, what do you do with the Nebula? And they said, we don't know. So I would like to promise SIFLA that in exchange for this award, I will find a use for it. Thank you.
The novel has been defined as a work of prose fiction at least 40,000 words long. I stepped on my own joke there. At least 40,000 words long that has something wrong with it. And yet, paradoxically enough, this is the award that we all lust after in our hearts. I was talking some years back with Joe Haldeman about awards, and he said, you know, every now and then fans ask me how many awards I've won, and I say, well, you know, to be perfectly honest, I'm not really sure. I think it's 11 Hugos and Nebulas, but I'm not sure if it's 5 Hugos and 6 Nebulas, or 5 Nebulas and 6 Hugos. And then he leaned forward, and he smiled, and he said, they hate it when you tell them that. So to present the award for Best Novel, Joe Haldeman, the only man who has more nebulas than he knows.
Thank you. Well, there are about a half dozen people in this room who want me to just rip open this envelope. But many of you want me to delay and watch those half dozen people squirm and sweat. Having been in that position many times myself, I should have sympathy for them, shouldn't I? Well, yeah. I should say, when I was nominated for the Forever War back in 1975, I was waiting in this a similar place to this in Los Angeles, and we had had a huge, wonderful meal that Robert Silverberg had chosen. Thick sirloin steaks and great potatoes. I hadn't eaten a bite. I was so nervous that I couldn't even look at the food. And when you're up for the novel, you have to wait until the heat death of the universe. And so I'm sitting there. In those days, the winner was not a deeply kept secret, which I did not know. And so I was running to the bathroom every 10 minutes. I really was, running. And they give the award for the short story, and I run off to the bathroom. And they give it for the novelette, and I run off to the bathroom, and I'm just getting really... And Ben Bova leaned over to my wife and said, "Doesn't he know he won?" I didn't. He did. So anyhow, for those of you who don't know whether you won, which I think is everybody on this list, I will proceed. The first on the list is The Native Star by M.K. Hobson. The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. Shades of Milk and Honey by Mary Robinette Kowal. Echo by Jack McDivitt. Who Fears Death by Nidhi Okorafor. And Blackout/All Clear by Connie Willis. And the winner will be Blackout/All Clear.
Thank you so much. Boy, am I glad the world didn't end at 6